The 20th Century Film Program presents Water has always been a symbol of life. Today, after many decades of thoughtless and criminal misuse of rivers, lakes and seas as dumps for garbage, refuse and even chemical munitions, all water must be treated with great care. Baltic Apocalypse. This is a map of the Baltic. It shows the sites where the Allies dumped German chemical weapons after the Second World War. 300,000 tons of chemical munitions containing over 60,000 tons of poisonous substances. The history of chemical weapons goes back to 1915, the First World War. That was when deadly gas was used for the first time. The pleasant aroma of freshly mown hay, the smell of Ecological, the stench of death. Very soon, the warring armies were provided with gas masks. But chemical weapons still accounted for about 1 million casualties. More than 100,000 of them died. The effects of poisonous gases proved to be so awful that after the First World War, the members of the League of Nations signed in Geneva a protocol to prohibit the use of chemical weapons.
Но это вовсе не означало его полного запрещения, прекращения производства и уничтожения. Оно было дешево и эффективно.
But by no means did that mean a total ban on those weapons, or an end to their production, or their destruction. They were too cheap and effective. The factories just went on producing the deadly weapons. In the 20s and 30s, poisonous substances were used in several local conflicts. In 1937, a directive of the German General Staff stated, "We should not repeat the errors of the First World War. When gas was used in small amounts, chemical weapons should be used promptly, without warning, in the decisive place and on a broad front." The Second World War broke out in 1939 with the use of conventional arms. Inevitably, it sucked into its vortex millions upon millions of victims. As for poison gas, it was used in German concentration camps for brutal experiments and mass killings. At the end of 1942, when the German army's eastern offensive was halted, Hitler was planning to use chemical weapons. His intentions became known to the Allies. They warned their enemy that a chemical offensive would promptly meet an adequate response. This was no empty threat, and to the very end of the war, Hitler never dared to let this deadly genie out of its bottle. For a long time after the war, the public was unaware of what happened to Germany's chemical weapons. Only recently did it come to light that in 1946, a secret agreement was signed by the three great powers for the elimination of the sea's chemical weapons. It was decided that the best option would be to sink the stockpiles of poisonous substances in the sea. About 50 old ships were assembled. Overloaded, they were towed out to sea and scuttled. Each of the victorious powers disposed of their own spoils. Britain and the United States, removed from their zone of responsibility, 267,875 tons of chemical munitions. Britain and the United States removed from their zone of responsibility 267,875 tons of chemical munitions. A large portion was dumped in the Strait of Skagerrak, connecting the Baltic and North Seas.
Большая часть их была затоплена в заливе Скагеррак, соединяющем Балтийское и Северное моря.
Helmut Kühner served as a mechanic on a support ship. He testified that a portion of the dangerous cargo was sunk together with the ships not far from Bornholm Island. The Soviet Union's share was 35,000 tons. The shells and bombs with Ecological and cyclone gas were dumped piecemeal near Bornholm Island and the port of Liepāja. Konstantin Terskov, Captain 3rd rank, retired. In 1947, I was serving in the Baltic. I was in command of a special assignment naval group. In April 1947, I was summoned by the Chief of Staff and ordered to sink some munitions. We were supposed to load them onto vessels, take them to the sea, and sink them at a depth of 101 meters, not less than 100 meters. I was also instructed to sink the ships no later than the 1st of January 1948. The order was carried out. The munitions were sunk. The documents deposited in the archives. The bombs and shells, together with their deadly stuffing, vanished as if forever in the depths of the sea. Lord Walden.
How should we get rid of these dangers? It depends on the exact nature of them. Some of the chemicals, indeed, may be better simply left in place. Some of them should be encased very more securely, no doubt. But some chemicals really are better disposed of by high temperature oxidation or chemical disposal of one sort or another. These questions can only be solved by technical experts, and certainly the man in the street and the politician in the street has no idea of precisely which weapons were dumped. Some of them were German, and maybe the records are no longer in existence. But it is certainly worth searching through the records which are available. It requires a joint effort by all the nations concerned, especially those in the Baltic area, and to put together their scientific best brains to consider the matter and to recommend. And when it comes to practical measures, then I can only conceive that an international effort will be desirable and that the expertise will only be available from the top brains of all major countries.
Vice Admiral Professor Tengiz Borisov, Chief of Operations for Environmentally Hazardous Sunken Objects. Today, 50 years later, it is useless to try and apportion the blame. You have to realize that people were trying to get rid of the awesome legacy of the Second World War, chemical arms. The Baltic Sea is an enclosed region where many countries catch fish. Now, just take a look at this map of the surface currents. The waters from the North Sea are propelled by the bottom currents through the Strait of Skagerrak into the Baltic Sea at a speed of 1.7 knots. After making a full circle along the entire coast of the Baltic, The waters flow right back to the North Sea, on the surface this time, again through the Strait of Skagerrak, where most of the chemical munitions were dumped. This means that in the event of a massive surge of poisonous substances, the current will inevitably carry them to all of the littoral countries: Denmark, Germany, Poland, Russia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Russia again, Finland and Sweden, and from there to the North Sea and new victims. The fearsome consignment lying on the bottom of the Baltic made itself felt even in the first decades after the war. The whole world watched the saving of fishermen from the Faroe Islands, who caught a corroded air bomb with mustard gas inside. They were lifted from their vessel by a helicopter and then treated at length in hospital for a racking cough and unhealing burns. Quite a few similar stories can be told by fishermen from other Baltic countries too.
Немало таких же историй могут рассказать рыбаки из других стран Балтики.
Liepāja, Klaipēda, this is the area, and all along this Liepāja depression, but mostly I came across them right there. Torpedoes, mines and bombs are dragged up all the time. Professor Valentin Tarasov, chairman of the board of the Russian Mutagenic Society. Like ionizing radiation, Ecological may affect hereditary structures, genes and chromosomes, including human cells. This results in malignant tumors, suppression of resistibility and stability, or, for example, can lead to infectious diseases. In terms of future generations, the result could be the birth of children with defects of mental and physical development, or hereditary diseases. In this case, we're talking about damage to the genofund, to the biological foundation of the human being as a species. And this damage, as in the case of radiation, would have no threshold, regardless of dose or concentration. That is my first point. Secondly, the damage is irreversible, and this means that the genetic effects of Ecological may not appear right away, but even after several generations, that is, after tens and hundreds of years.
Что последствия, генетические последствия воздействия иприта проявляются и сразу, и спустя целый ряд поколений организмов, то есть спустя десятки и сотни лет.
The deadly shells and bombs lying in the holds of the sunken ships have long since rusted through, and the day is not far off when the bottom layers will be crushed by the weight of the upper ones. And that is when disaster can strike in the form of a massive surge. The water in the enclosed space of the Baltic is renewed every 27 years. The fish catch from the Baltic and Northern Seas basin amounts to about 2.5 million tons. The average consumption per person stands at 10 kilograms of seafood a year, which means that 250 million people risk eating contaminated fish. Russia was fated to be the first to confront the problem of underwater contamination. The submarine Komsomolets, which sank in 1989, began to cause serious trouble 2 years after the accident. After 2.5 years, traces of cesium and strontium were detected in the water. It was clear that the radionuclides were leaking from the reactor, even though in insignificant amounts. But the worst danger lay in the 2 nuclear warheads, with over 6 kilograms of strontium. Obviously, if that escaped into the water, a vast area of the Norwegian Sea would be contaminated. And we are facing similar problems today, as we deal with the problems of contamination of the sea.
Первая идея была самой простой – поднять затонувшую подводную лодку.
The first idea was the simplest one: raise the sunken submarine. A feasible plan was developed, but underwater research revealed that the boat's hull would not stand the strain. That meant it would have to rest on the seabed forever. The boat's reactor was reliably blocked. The cesium and strontium were leaking so insignificantly that they could easily and quickly be neutralized by seawater. The main danger were the warheads, with their 6.5 kilograms of plutonium.
Это боеголовки, где находится 6,5 килограммов плутония. Как их изолировать? Возвести непроницаемый саркофаг? Но на такой глубине это невозможно. Опустить его сверху.
How to isolate them? By building an impenetrable sarcophagus? But at such a depth, it is impossible. To lower it down from above is unrealistic. Another option was to pump a special gel into the boat from the surface, so as to fully insulate the interior of the boat from the environment. But the complete insulation of the warheads could provoke a spontaneous chain reaction and a thermal explosion. Only one other option was left, and that was to insulate the hull reliably with special plugs and plasters. This unique operation was carried out with the help of deep-water manned submersibles equipped with special manipulators. The most recent samplings at the site of the sunken submarine have revealed no traces of plutonium in the seawater. There is no time to lose. The rate of corrosion in the cold Baltic water is 1/10 of a millimeter per year. The small amounts of poisonous substances which are leaking through the rusted metal of the shells are so far still being neutralized by the sea. The problem is to prevent a massive surge. The question is how. The use of pontoons to raise the corrosion-riddled ships is out of the question. They simply wouldn't stand the strain. The option of raising the munitions piece by piece is just as unrealistic. The construction of a sarcophagus for each of the 50 vessels lying at depths between 100 and 120 meters would take too much time, and the time is simply not there. The search for a technical solution brings to mind one of the options which was studied for the sunken submarine Komsomolets. Nikolai Nosov, Deputy Chief Designer. We are on board a special vessel intended for drilling operations on the continental shelf. This vessel can operate at depths of up to 300 meters and perform highly complex underwater drilling operations and the installation of various equipment required for drilling. And let me say that the vessel is perfectly suitable for highly complex operations to localize hazardous objects at the bottom of the sea, in particular the burial places of chemical weapons. This method is particularly appealing because the position of the vessel on the seabed has no basic significance. The injection of a special substance converts the hull of the sunken vessel, together with all its contents, into a resilient monolith which reliably protects the environment from deadly emissions. General Surikov was one of the first to publish information about the sunken weapons. A major role in mobilizing public opinion belongs to the Victory 1945 Fund, headed by Marshal Yefimov. World War II veterans regard it as their duty to help people get rid of the terrible legacy of the war.
Есть средства для ее осуществления. Что дальше? Ведь уже прошло почти 5 лет с того дня, как общественные и негосударственные объединения начали кампанию за скорейшую нейтрализацию опаснейших захоронений.
World terrorism, of course, is an increasing menace, and they are, I'm afraid, often very clever in their methods and very ruthless. And these dumped weapons are a potential source of terrorist activity. If we do not deal with it, we are leaving a time bomb there for terrorists to stir up. Certainly, it will be a matter of probably $1 billion or more even to examine it properly. But the cost of not doing so will be even greater. There is a great deal of technology already in the West and in Russia, which has a great deal of experience in these matters, and it would be unthinkable not to cooperate closely in the solution.
We can see that there is no time to lose. The problem must be resolved today. The situation is aggravated by the very amounts of the sunken chemical weapons. Those amounts are comparable by volume to the stockpiles of chemical weapons which are to be destroyed under the convention signed in 1993, that is, the combined weaponry stockpiled by Russia and the United States. You can see, therefore, what the quantities are. No less clear is the framework within which the sunken chemical weaponry is to be destroyed. If the weapons to be destroyed under the Convention are under control and are located in clearly defined areas, and if the technology for their destruction is equally well defined, so that international commissions and experts can monitor the process, the problem of eliminating the chemical weapons sunken in the Baltic has not been settled either by the Convention of 1993 or by any other international agreement. You have just seen this film, and I believe you will have understood the gravity of the problem. That gravity will not allow any one nation, including Russia, to assume any unilateral obligations to solve the problem, or, all the more, to remain oblivious to it. That is why we are proposing an international plan to save the Baltic, and thereby to save the economy of the nations bordering on the Baltic. We are prepared to subject our technologies to international scrutiny. Moreover, we are prepared to provide our research ships for the initial phase of the project. But the project itself must be highly complex and multilateral. This film was produced by Boris Zagryavsky, Tengiz Borisov, Alexander Marutyan, Alexander Garibyan, Vadim Nabotnikov, Valery Grizlov, Mikhail Medvedev, and Roman Kornbrand. The film crew wishes to thank the Victory 1945 Fund, Ecoros and Elros companies, and the Russian Industrial Bank for their help.